If you're a business owner or senior manager, you probably had more than enough about all the wonderful opportunities awaiting you in the era of digitalization.
Whether it is big data, cloud, data science, or whatever buzzword is currently trendy.
If you would like to hear someone dissecting these claims and showing you what it actually takes to improve business processes, you're in the right place.
This is Between Data and Risk, where we discuss real-life examples of what works and what doesn't in the world of business operations.
Hello, I'm a friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian Siwiak, and with me is our resident risk steward, Artur.
Hello.
Welcome to Between Data and Risk. Today, we'll have a look at the music and the rebellion, and we have with us Ariana Alexander-Sefre of Spoke, who agreed to share some of her experiences with us. Hello, Ariana.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming.
It's very nice to have you here. So thank you for coming from me as well. So before we get into this, the idea of rebellion that Marian mentioned, let's get kind of to the beginning. Spoke. You founded Spoke. Can you tell us what it is and where it came from? What's behind it?
And what's different about it?
No, of course. So I'll give you some of the backstory. I spent many years working in wellness. So I ran a events company doing big wellness events in London and in New York. I noticed that the wellness culture, it was very exclusive, and to be honest, it still is. And then in 2017, sadly, my brother lost one of his best friends to suicide. And obviously that shouldn't have happened. But then I also saw my brother and his friends refuse therapy, refuse counselling. I worked in a world with all of these tools, CBT, coaching, all this stuff. And it was very, very obvious that none of these practices, important practices that can help you metabolize emotion, deal with grief, etc., none of them were accessible, relevant for him and his friends, let alone his, poor friend who unfortunately lost his life. And this, truthfully, I became quite angry at the epidemic that we live in. We do have an epidemic within mental health. It is a systemic problem. And there is a especially bad issue within young male mental health right now. So I actually started studying this myself. And then I ended up getting a scholarship to do a research master's at Cambridge in social innovation, which is basically the study of how do you overcome global systemic social problems. My focus was in young male mental health. And that's where I did kind of all of my research papers. And well, one of the big things, and I guess I had an inkling of this anyway, but one of the big things that were coming up is that music was one of the key tools for managing, difficult emotions, problem sleeping, relationship issues, stress, anxiety, etc. And it's quite obvious, when you say it, people know that, but the interesting thing is the world of the music industry, and still really to this day, hasn't properly thought about how it can use its power, its cultural power, to help solve the mental health problem. Mental health tools are wrapped in clinical or yogi cultures that just don't resonate or represent a huge proportion of young people, young men, of course, but then young people from underserved backgrounds as well. And that's where Spoke kind of was born, and our mission was to create culturally relevant, accessible mental health care that truly felt different. It could really connect with groups that didn't go to therapy. They didn't use apps like Calm and Headspace. And the reason it works is because we work with some of the world's best musicians. So they're trained by a team of psychologists, neuroscientists to deliver mental health care that is clinically efficient, but it's delivered through music. And then that gives it the cultural power.
How does it work? Like, let's say, I'm clinically treating my depression. How does it work in your app?
So the app can be seen a bit like a music and well-being app. So we don't talk about, so this is the thing, we don't really talk much about, we are doing this for mental health. We talk about boosting your confidence, helping with sleep, helping with relaxation, helping with focus. And when you go into the app, we've basically created a huge catalogue of music stems, and then we've created algorithms to make sure that you get a deeply personalised experience. When you go on, you'll do a initial kind of check-in where we get to know the music genres you like to listen to, the kind of voices that you resonate with, and then you might say, okay, I've got 10 minutes, I'm feeling really stressed and it's about work and I can't sleep. and then the app will give you something based on the music that you like. It will give you something that, will help you with, the sleep issues.
It's very interesting that you mentioned this kind of dichotomy between the science, in the clinical setting, and then on the other hand, the kind of more mystical, occult, yogi trappings. That you get this distinction. So your solution is really getting off that plane and into something that people haven't really touched. It's how do you maintain this kind of separation from this solution, this choice between clinical or mystical? How do you maintain this separation, and how do you maintain the authenticity of this solution?
Yeah, so in a way, we don't need to maintain a huge amount of separation, because what we're doing, it feels so different. So naturally, the people that love Spoke and come to Spoke regularly already, the other options have already failed them. They already didn't feel like they were understood or listened to. They already felt invisible by, the world of kind of clinical practices, or they felt like they didn't feel like they fitted into a yoga class, for example, or mindfulness activities, which is unfair. Everyone should be able to do all of these things. It's, it makes no sense, because it's not the tool's fault, but the problem is that a lot of these practices are wrapped in a culture that a lot of people just don't feel like they want to do it. It doesn't represent their identity, their kind of interests. So we do say that within Spoke, you will find clinical practices. So CBT, positive psychology, mindfulness techniques, you'll find this kind of stuff in there, but it will be delivered to you in a way that feels interesting, engaging, and actually kind of embodied as well. So there's a lot of research around kind of embodied healing, and, really, if you feel something, where does it feel on your body? Okay, maybe it's an invitation to like move that, or shake or stretch or do some kind of exercise. So we do a lot of work, and we really invite people to practice a more embodied approach to understanding their emotions.
There's one thing that bugs me a little. Clinical therapy, it shouldn't be an element of culture. The element of culture is creating a taboo around it. So people who say that they don't feel like they belong to clinical therapy, and I completely agree that the mental health is an epidemic. I was working on an app that was supposed to utilize large language models to provide some mental wellness. I don't want to say healthcare, but mental wellness. And I completely failed to fund it. So, but it's different. But when I was doing my research around it, one of the problems is that still mental health and getting help, especially for young men, is a taboo. Do you see the way for normalizing this relationship between these young people who maybe are culturally not mature enough to use the professional help via your app? Can you bring them closer to actual medical professionals? Because as I very much respect mental wellness, mental health is a bit deeper. Sometimes it requires medication. I'm speaking from experience. Does your app bring this connection between people who are afraid of being tagged as freaks and nuts to medical professionals who can, help them maybe on a bit different level, I would say biochemical level?
Yes, so there's actually two parts of that I'd love to answer. So the first thing is, one of our metrics that we try to work by is comfort with the idea of seeking help. So we have been looking at how much more, because we're not here to clinically diagnose or provide clinical support for, severe forms of depression or, ADHD. You have to get clinical support for that, of course. But, we do have an anxiety, mild depression epidemic that actually a lot of it can be at least alleviated and people can get by, especially when they're on the, waiting lists, for example. So that's another thing. We work with healthcare organizations who have very, very long waiting lists. So comfortability with seeking clinical help is that's a really big thing. The thing that's really what we found is that in order to kind of connect with our target audience, it's important to use the right language. And I mean, we're called Spoke for a reason, because we believe language is important, and the way things are articulated and the power of spoken word. So we have spent the first year and a half just interviewing thousands of young people who we wanted to target. And we use the kind of language that they use. Things like, I'm feeling stressed and I just need to relax, or I'm anxious about money and I don't know what to do. I'm totally overwhelmed. Or what's come up a lot is, I don't know what's wrong. I have no idea. I just can't sleep. I get angry. I feel like overwhelmed, like my head's going to explode, but I have no idea what's going on. So we see that a lot as well. So helping people with emotional articulation and emotional literacy is a really kind of important part of, I guess why we're doing what we're doing. The other side to that, which is something that I do like to mention because I do think it's important, is that therapy is only a proven model in the West. And that's not a bad, that's, we live in the West. So that makes sense. It works, for us. And it is very, very important. But we're failing to see some of like the root causes of a lot of issues and bringing together, community, understanding systemic inequalities and some of these other reasons behind someone's mental health. They can be solved with things like social prescribing, which I know is happening a lot now. So we do fit into that category of, looking more at root causes.
You mentioned social prescribing.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the term. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. No, of course. So I guess it's
Go out and take a drink with your friends?
Maybe not a drink, but, for some people, it does. There's a reason why in the UK, pub culture brings people together. That's how especially a lot of men will see their friends. The culture is changing now, though. Now more than ever before, young people don't, there's lots of young people that don't drink alcohol. So there's a real kind of culture change. But yes, social prescribing could be, anything from taking some walks in nature to maybe getting involved with a local community group, maybe volunteering with a local charity. There's a really good charity called, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called the Men's Shed. All over the UK, it's a local project where older men, like 70, 80 plus, who might be isolated, maybe live on their own, will go to these workshops and they're basically making things. It's like carpentry. I think they partner with local schools and stuff, and they get together and, they're just creating and talking, and it's, run by somebody who is a carpenter themselves and is also trained in mental health. So, projects like that would fall under social prescribing. And I think it's been really, really impactful for a lot of people.
I know where's
It sounds really, really, really powerful. But I wanted to ask you, because, I'm the risk guy. So immediately what comes to my mind is whenever I was thinking about getting involved in healthcare projects, and Marian already mentioned an app which we were considering, it's always kind of ringing alarm bells for me, because there is such a huge responsibility and risks are immense. So how do you actually manage the risks within Spoke? Not only the kind of the obvious risk of kind of delivering something which people rely on, but also your more general risk, like your reputational risk, which I would consider to be quite big in this area, and risk of just losing, your.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's something we've thought about the entire time. From even before we started creating anything, everything we built was backed by lots of research that either I did myself or I kind of found, and we, worked with clinical psychologists, to really kind of understand, a lot of and even understand some of the principles around, sound therapy, functional sound science, what is science and what isn't science. And the thing is, like, I guess, we're not a team of neuroscientists. We're kind of, I guess social innovators is a better description. Sorry, I just lost my trail of thought.
We're talking about
it's risk we were talking about.
The risk that Artur was considering when we were, writing our failed app. I think it could be translated to your case. Like, what would you do if somebody it's a brutal, but it could come true. Somebody would committed suicide and they would be found with their iPod set on Spoke, and somebody would say, because, we are living in a world where nothing sells like a good tragedy, Spoke drove him to it.
Yeah.
this is the
No, of course. No, of course. And I mean, anything like that is not just a brand. I'm sorry, but forget a brand. If something like that happened, it would be personally, I wouldn't care about anything but the person itself. But I guess, knowing that everything that we've created is based on, proven forms of mental health care. So that's the first thing. So everything that we work with our artists, we know that there are, this is like, there are proven techniques in there. So we know that this is the way a therapist might talk about grief, for example, or this is the way a good coach might talk about confidence building. And I'm so sorry, there's actually quite a lot of noise. I just wanted to check that.
I think it's Artur's dog. Artur.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I did. That's so.
With that.
No, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like interrupting the recording. I didn't know if I was the only one who could hear it. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of the first stage. And then as we've been creating the app, we've been, constantly, iterating, making sure we're getting the right feedback. And then we signpost as well. So we will check for, risky behaviors. If someone is submitting reports that they are consistently feeling really, really bad, they will get a pop-up sending them to, where they can get further support, mind all the different charities, Samaritans, if it's an emergency, how they can sign up for, forms of counselling. There's lots of text counselling services like Shout. And so we make sure that we signpost as well as we can. And working in the field of mental health, of course, there are risks. But the thing that I've definitely seen is that the mental health solutions that are out there have not solved the problem. We have got an abundance of mental health products and services, and the mental health problem is getting worse and worse and worse. And my fear is that we have been so risk averse, and we have almost intellectualized mental health support to such a degree that we are no longer giving people something that's just truly human. People need to feel connected. They need to feel a sense of awe and joy and curiosity, and they need to feel listened to. So that's why, a lot of young black men, for example, that's why a lot of them don't go and get therapy, because there are not many young black male therapists. People want to feel like they are connecting with somebody that represents them, that understands them, especially if they're someone from a more marginalized or underserved group. So this is sort of, that's my view on, we have lots of safeguarding practices in place, but, I think one of the big problems is that, there's so much fear that we are now unable to solve the problem, basically.
Let's talk about guardrails, let's say, and breaking them, because we wanted to talk to you about the rebellion. You decided to do something radical. You decided to do something a bit different. My question is about, because I can imagine that with your impact, making people feel much better, it's like iTunes on steroids. Right? You get the music, and it's the right music to make you actually feel better, not like certain big brands. They are pushing more and more nameless or royalty-free music just to increase their profit margin. How do you plan to avoid that? The temptation is great, right? It's all of the sudden, you might compete with Spotify, you might compete with, music on YouTube or on iTunes. How do you balance? Because on one hand, you are running a business, must bring, at least be, probably on the level. But I guess investors are more interested in getting the return on investment than on actual good. Or maybe I'm too pessimistic about the humanity.
Well, firstly, our investors, we only accept money from impact investors and people that care about our impact. I will never accept any money from people that don't care about that. So that's the first thing. And obviously, as a social enterprise, we care about, making profits and doing well commercially and continuing to grow, of course. But then we also make sure that the social impact side will never get sacrificed for one for the other. And we've got that baked into our articles of association. So that is legally within our company. And I believe that every company should have that. So I don't know if you've heard about the Better Business Act in the UK, but it's a pledge to basically get, the impact, environmental or social impact of the company baked into the legals so that the directors are legally obliged to never put shareholder profits above social good. And my personal opinion is that if every company did that, then investors would have to agree that that's the way things are done. And then now we're all investing for a better world and to make profits and everyone's succeeding, but we don't have that because there are a lot of people who are very adamant that that shouldn't be in place because they want to make a lot of money off of arms sales and whatever else. That's kind of my...
It doesn't have to be an arms sales. Like we had this discussion a lot of times, and just a couple episodes ago, we had amazing discussion about the capitalism and its neoliberal form originating in 70s. So I'm really happy to hear that there are some movements. Are there any plans to make it like obligatory, to put the actual mission and vision into the legal statement, make it something more than just, the little leaf covering naked truth about the...
So do you mean for Spoke it is legal? So we've already got that.
I know. I'm asking if anybody thought that we're putting this as an obligation for every company. If you have a mission and vision, put it into your legal papers so it's a step higher than shareholders' profit.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of companies that do that. I mean, Bethnal Green Ventures, who are the UK's first tech for good fund, they're my favourite investors. They're really, really great. They were our first investors as well. So it's a requirement. They require any company they invest in to do that. And I think that's a really good principle. And to be honest, at the early stages, it doesn't make any difference, really. It's not going to change much by having that written into your articles of association. But I think it very softly ensures that you keep going in the direction of impact rather than getting, sidelined a few years in.
Series by series.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that it's at the very beginning where you actually create the culture of the company and it crystallizes its true form. This is where it is really important to bake in that vision. Obviously, I come from a banking industry, and the banking industry has been fighting against ESG onslaught for years now. And the biggest risk for any ESG program within a bank is obviously greenwashing. Right? Because it's been in the papers many times, and it seems like there is a very similar risk there in this kind of practice where you've got your articles of association with really compelling vision and mission and values, but then it kind of gets washed out with time, and it's like, okay, it becomes a bit, some piece of paper gathering dust. So how do you actually make it live in your company so that everyone lives and breathes that on a day-to-day basis?
For sure. And I think that's a really good question. Like, of course, a lot of these things, can just be, I guess just not really taken that seriously. But I believe that keeping this integrity and this impact, I think it survives in the integrity of the very small things that you do. So who you hire, what you center, what you say no to as well, being very open about the fact that we are not going to work with this client because they have links with X or X, and that's an unethical company and we don't want to be associated, and telling them so. And that's really difficult for people to do. And still to this day, I don't know many people that are doing it. But the more founders and people who say, thank you, but I'm not going to accept money from you because you have invested in, and this is a true story, by the way, because you have invested, £400 million in a arms manufacturer that is supplying arms to the Israeli military. That's something that I actually said, and that's why we didn't take the money. So these are the kind of things that when they are spoken about and people start having conversations, and in these very small ways, change starts to happen.
But then the motto of our podcast is what works and what doesn't in the world of business operations. So let's have a look here, because I understand it can work when you have group of people with whom you are, let's say, able to talk. So it's up to 30, 50, 60 people. I can't remember the research currently. But then you move from this personal relationship to when you scale, when you grow, you have more and more layers of people who have their own interests. So you may not accept, let's say, money from the dirty investors, which is absolutely commendable, and chapeau bas. How do you think of protecting your company when not everyone will be able to talk to you? And you will be able to organize all the meetings and once a week or once a month try to push this spirit into them, but they will be bogged down by everyday worries and what will my manager say. So it's not only about taking money; it's about this also relation between each other.
100%.
And so it's not only about the product, I think. So how do you plan to I don't know, turn the vision process? Yeah, scale this vision.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think, I personally think the relationships within teams and how a vision can trickle down is in the way you help make people feel. And people know that they are listened to, and you can have. And I think the role of a founder or a CEO when you're trying to lead a vision is to lead it by an example, to listen well to people, to be a good representative of people, and then just keep moving the ship forward. And ultimately, you have to make sure you hire people that are going to do a very, very good job at, they are a good fit and they're good at translating the vision, and they're also good at listening and managing teams of people. Of course, complications inevitably are going to come up, but as long as that culture is maintained through small practices and rituals that people start to associate with your company and your brand. At Spoke, what we do, every morning before we do our stand up is a quick fire round of how we're feeling and what's going on for us. This morning, couldn't sleep last night because the kids were awake all night and it was really stressful and I'm exhausted. I say, okay, great. Well, that's actually really good to know. So I know if you're not quite as energetic today, we know why. And creating that culture of feeling comfortable with each other, as I guess in a way as friends as well. And that's something that takes time and it takes dedication. It takes having, practices and rituals that people come to, rely on. And slowly, I believe from experience that this can have a really good effect. But it's also difficult because, people are bogged down. When most people anyway, when they're very, very busy, become very tunnel visioned in, I just need to focus on this, get this done. And that's absolutely fine. But some practices, they need to be a priority in order to keep the sync and the adhesion of the team. So it's a bit like, for however long we don't prioritize taking a half an hour walk outside every day, no music, no nothing, just to think and to, be in the air. We don't prioritize that as much as getting through 10 emails, but I can promise you that is just as important. So I'm trying to help people see that there are some things that are just as much of a priority as other things.
Self-care is such a big priority. And what you just said, it reminded me so much of an episode we had recorded with Jamie J. About his company and his vision and his little rituals. And I remember he was talking about his little acronyms that he devised for his people, which kind of brought to life the values that he was running in his company. Exactly the same kind of energy and feeling of the vision. But I wanted to kind of turn the dial a bit and ask you about maybe a bit provocative question, because you have a history of working actually in a bank in City, which I found on your LinkedIn. And I wanted to ask you how that actually shaped your view of the corporate world. And, how would you contrast your current vision, your goal with the corporate world that you experienced there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've got a couple of experiences working with within big corporate environments. And obviously being in North America, in New York City, working for a very intense private bank,
It was get more corporate than that.
You don't get more corporate than that. It was a very, very interesting experience. But all I can say is that the culture of being within that company told me everything I needed to know about what was wrong with the culture and I think the corporate environment is very different in the UK, to be completely honest. I think I kind of got a very unique experience, but burnout rates were very, very high. Personally, I suffered a lot of burnout. I think there was, immense, stresses from a disconnection between team members. My feeling was that team members were acting against each other rather than collaboratively. And I think that affected people in a very difficult way. I saw people get fired because of somebody feeding somebody information, and it was a very traumatic experience for them. I even saw, and I'm very happy to just say this, but I even saw at one of the big awards ceremonies, an award was given to somebody and they said, well, he was even on a family holiday and he left early to come back in and finish the project. And that just shows you dedication. And I sat there like, what is going on? And this is back in 2015. So we're 10 years on now. I know that things have changed, quite a lot.
The better?
I think slightly for the better, just because of so much awareness around, mental health, issues like I think there's a lot of people that work very high up in big corporate companies that feel that they can get away with anything as well. And frankly, in New York, they can. So that's, what I saw with my own eyes. And this was all part of the reason why I actually left, and I think that there's a lot of people that are working in environments, and it might not be as extreme as what I experienced, but they're working in environments where they feel almost suffocated, like they're not connected with their team, like their mental health and well-being isn't a priority, like they don't, have tools and outlets to process a lot of the stress and burnout that comes with a very intense role within something like a big financial institution. And I think that can have a disastrous effect on people. And I think we're, seeing that now, even in today's climate, people's freedoms in what they can say, what they can do, where they can go is very restricted because they're so terrified about what their workplace might do to them. Will I get fired for saying something that is actually a pretty normal and good thing to say, but I can't because of, our political climate. And so this is something I'm really interested in. I'm, incredibly interested in, the power of institutions and the institutional systemic control of our culture in our society, that I don't think many people are aware of either. And this is even something we talk about in Spoke. The more we think that there's it's a real, I guess it is Western psychology way of thinking, which really promotes the idea that kind of everything that you're feeling can be solved just within your own mind. If you're feeling angry or depressed or you're having money worries, it can just be solved by, focusing on you. Yeah, happy breathing, focus in your own mind. And it is irresponsible and actually immoral, I think, to ignore the systemic inequalities that are affecting a lot of people and the fact that some of us exist within systems where we actually don't have the kind of freedoms that, might promote a greater sense of calm and presence. So yeah.
Because what you're saying is actually, there is this topic which is maybe not as hot as last year, but I don't think the issue has been solved. Work from home, remote work. There are two, I would say, visions. One say, if you work from home or remotely, you don't have work-life balance, like, your living place, your home becomes your working place. On the other hand, you have this view that companies just want to control you, and forcing you to come to the office is the way of enforcing this control. What's your take, and what do you, let's say, do in your company? Do you allow people work from home or not?
So this is a really good question. I mean, I don't know if you remember in the UK, we were testing out 4-day weeks for a while. And so there was a big thing about moving over to a 4-day week. Yeah, I think now, and I think legally you now need to give people the option to work from home if they, have to pick up kids from school, etc. Frankly, there's no better, more productive way of working than having people together. There just isn't. You can't create the same kind of synergy, speed, agility, connection as, when you're all sitting on Zoom and your eyes are now hurting and you've got a headache because you've been on Zoom for 10 hours. So frankly, I much prefer, and I've been very open about the fact that I much prefer people coming in as much as they can. But at the same time, when you've got team members who have very small children and have other responsibilities, it's giving that flexibility is really important. And then that's why I think it's so important to work on how being within the company, when you're at work with your team, making sure people obviously enjoy it, but then they can actually see and give them evidence as to how it's more productive. If it is more productive, it might not be. For some companies, I know there are some companies that are fully remote. Us, it's a bit different because, we make music together. We sit and we talk about ideas that's the kind of thing. It's a connection is involved in that process. But there are lots of companies that don't necessarily need that. And, and I like to show evidence. These days that we spent together, look at what we could create. So let's make sure that when we do a project like that again, we can section out 3 or 4 days to just intensely work on it together in a space where we won't be bothered, etc. And there's never been any issue with that.
We mainly work with data people and IT people, so there is a bit different, I would say, mindset. I personally, if I need to go to the meeting, I'm a bit rarely it's something that I would consider extremely productive.
And to be honest, I think for a lot of roles, a lot of meetings aren't very productive. I think creating something together, like creating music is very difficult to just sit, unless you're doing the mastering, mixing, you're just kind of post-production phase. It's kind of very difficult to just sit and do that on your own. But yeah, if I'm doing kind of lots of admin or I'm working on some budgets, I like to sit there and just get it all done and have no distractions. So that's why I do think that flexibility and understanding what's needed, and do we actually need a day of sitting in meetings? Is that going to be productive? Because I think as long as, however people spend their time, it ends up being productive and they feel like it's been productive, then it's going to work. The problem happens when people start getting forced to be in. Like, I know I've got a couple of friends that work for some of the London's big banks, and they're like, we're in 5 days a week now. They're forcing us to go in. We have to go in now 5 days a week. And they said, well, it's frustrating because I just sit there. I can't focus. I've got this person talking behind me. And I think that's a bit of a failure in understanding, how people work.
The last question from me, if you allow.
Of course.
You mentioned about this social prescriptions. You worked for corporations, now you work in a startup. Did your social circle change? Did you observe that you have, hard time communicating with people that you knew who worked in the corporations and started to spend more time with people with, trying to break up the wall, so to speak?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I like that because I have had some changes in the people that I feel like I connect with over the past 10 years. Naturally, you can imagine a lot of the founders that I'm friends with, they also are impact founders and they're creating something that has impact at its core. But truthfully, I have a very, very wide range of people that I can connect with. And a big part of, like my studies around social innovation, key learning was, we need people in all areas of society to make change. There's a very big glamorization, and I've thought this for a long time, huge glamorization of entrepreneurs. 83% of young people want to be an entrepreneur. They want to set up their own business. And that's great, but the world is going to be hell if 83% of people are entrepreneurs. We need good, smart, conscious people working in big banks, in factories, in all different areas of society. Frankly, if you're an entrepreneur inside a big organization or inside a government, you do a very thankless job. You don't go and do podcast interviews. You don't, go and, go and speak at big conferences like an entrepreneur like me does. You work thanklessly your whole life, and you might not see the effect in your entire career, but that 1 degree change that you made might be a 30-degree change for millions of people in 20 years, 30 years time. And I want people that work at big organizations and institutions to know that, because I think there's a lot of people that are like, I care about impact in the world, but I work in a big bank. And I say, so good, be there and do that work within, help shift the culture, rise up in the ranks. These companies need good people. We don't want all the good people to be out there just running really small companies. We want them kind of everywhere. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great call to action, because, indeed there is that empowerment where everyone can make a small change, and actually it will all add up. And obviously if someone is struggling, if there's any problems, then they can turn to Spoke, which we sincerely recommend. And it is such a great idea to link something that is, it's called the universal language, music, right? And it is for a reason. So helping people through that can be really, really powerful. So thank you very much for sharing this with us and sharing your journey from the corporate world to changing people and changing their perception of mental health. I think this is really, really useful. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been really great to chat with you and meet you both.
And
Let's hope.
As always,